So are you that have stayed here sticking around for the next session? Okay. And I appreciate that. I did this last year, and it seemed like at the end of the day, the crowd started to dwindle little by little, trying to get home and beat traffic. So we'll get started. The session is aligning people and purpose with managerial leadership. It's interesting to have sat through with Nathan and Jen and what they had presented. This is really a subset of what they were talking about. I know about EOS and traction and a lot of those same operating systems or operating models. Our focus, though, is more down into the nitty-gritty, into management teams. So it's more along the lines of the manager role and then managerial leadership. So my name's Kelly Schaefbauer. I'm the lead analyst and founder for Aligned Management Partners. And so just to kind of get a sense for who's here, who has ever had a role of manager as a title in their so we've seen some of that. Awesome, all of it, all of you. I just realized, talk about a minority here. Wow. Awesome, I love it, awesome. And then founders in the group? Okay, yep. Somebody, if you, other CEO potential role in a larger organization or COO in a larger organization? Okay, so there's a split of that with it, so. So this is the only part of this presentation that I'm going to actually be reading from the slide. I promise I won't do the rest of it this way, but so this is a quote from Elliot Jacques. It's actually the beginning of a quote. The most far-reaching, dramatic, and rapid changes in the behavior of individuals in an organization can be achieved by. What would anybody think that would be? What is his response to what he would be? He was a psychoanalyst. He was a management consultant, and so he used a lot of science behind management theory for it. But what do you think he would respond as the number one thing you could do to change the behavior of individuals, to improve it? Anyone? Rewards? It's part of it, but there's a bigger picture to it. Again, those are smaller. We're talking like organizational.
I'd say clarity of purpose and the autonomy to work towards it.
Yep, that's part of it again. Basically, his response was it changes to the organization. So both in structure and in managerial leadership practices. I first read this quote after about 12 years of having my first business. At that time, we weren't that successful. I didn't know why. We had been in business about 12 years, and we were kind of capping out on that $800K a year. Our service delivery was full of chaos. I was just the entrepreneur that I can do it better. I was a tech in a corporate world, and I wanted to have a small business, and I had friends that needed help. And before I knew it, I had the entrepreneurial bug. Has anybody read the E-Myth, the book The E-Myth at all? So they talk about that entrepreneurial bug. And so I definitely did. And we grew it to where we had enough chaos going around. A lot of the things that Nathan and Jen were talking about, I was experiencing a lot of that from a negative side of things. And so at that same time, the person who introduced me to Elliot's work, and then on to other things as well, like traction and all these other aspects of it, he had been implementing a lot of these principles and philosophies into his business. And at that 12-year mark, where I was capping out at about $800K, he was exceeding 300 or 3 million in sales per year as a website development business. And then with my work in other, as an IT company, we got to know other small businesses. I was really seeing this impact of poor management and poor kind of ownership of the people and how it was impacting the people in their organizations, where I really was starting to conclude the environment that we create really does matter for it. So Elliot started to bring up that there's really 3 different phases to an organization when it starts. The first is proof of concept that a lot of the startups are in. It's where you're trying to figure things out. You're trying to figure out what's the best way to deliver on our promise, to fine-tune our service delivery or production, or whatever that might be. You're also looking from a promotional side of things. What's our message going to be? And then starting to convert prospects into clients. And so normally it's a founder and maybe a partner. You might be outsourcing some help at that point. But typically, there's a point to where we say proof of concept is over, where you're kind of maybe breaking even. You've got some things figured out. You've been able to successfully sell and keep some clients for it. The next part of it typically does not go well as businesses start to feel the pain of complexity. Nathan was talking about that. You're getting more volume. Your client issues are getting more complicated. You might be trying to add on some different services, maybe too quickly, potentially. Service delivery starts at this point to start feel more like chaos than it is in being more of a fine-tuned machine. It's usually at this point then that clients are starting to feel that. Your staff is definitely starting to feel the stress and the drama of what's going on there. There really, in a lot of these situations where I was observing, there really wasn't a management type of title going on. We were hiring people. We were throwing them at the problems, but there really wasn't a level of oversight for it. A lot of the times the clients are sensing that, they're going to start looking elsewhere. They start leaving, and before you know it, the business fails for it. That was not my fate. My fate was along the lines of the enemy of great is good. So we became that stale organization. I did this for 17 years. And the problem was I was making a decent income. I would go through fits and starts where I'd be like, all right, we're really gonna do it. I'm gonna improve the business. I'll read the next book, and we'll try it again. And it was kind of an ebb and flow, but it really didn't go anywhere. There was a point to where we had a very substantial failure in our service that was going to cost a company several $1,000s in this incident. They were a $60 million company and their server went down. We were responsible for that. Their biggest client was Coca-Cola. And we weren't prepared to react to that sort of outage. And so there was a point to where that's what finally got me out. I was like, all right, this is bad enough to where I feel like I'm not fit for this position or to do this kind of work anymore. We'll talk about later around where my thinking was from a visionary person into some of those other aspects. So how do we change that confusion, doubt, and drama to what we love, the idea of clarity, confidence, and trust? Nathan and Jen hit on that around clarity and the difference between it. I do have a little bit of difference in opinion on some of those things. I'm a structure person. I love instructions. I love SOP documents. I'm about get it as granular as possible. But anyway, there's points to where in different organizations where, depending on your teams, what's the right mix of that? And we'll talk about that in a bit. So the answer to that for me is to have an aligned management team. That level of oversight and we'll see it in a minute here, how you take the vision into the work that's happening in day to day. The problem that most businesses without aligned management team, there's no way to ensure that the work being done at the front line really is contributing to our purpose and mission. There's a level of disconnect. People start doing it their own way, and sometimes that's good. You want to have, I like validated learning, is something that's, let them try things, but as a group and a department, we're going to try to get the best for the group for that. So if you can put the right processes in place, like Elliot said, it's managerial leadership, the structure and the managerial leadership processes for it. Or practices. So if we can get that in place, then you get to a point to where your organization can grow and scale smoothly. I like the idea of your managers are sort of your lieutenants, to where they're now taking over different areas of the company for it. So this presentation's called Aligning People and Purpose. So what do we mean by that? What is purpose? And this is where it's not really my area of expertise, but it's, to me, that I try to boil things down to make it as simple as possible for small business. And that's really my passion. I worked in the corporate world, and I love the idea of startups. We typically work with companies that are 200K trying to get to $1 million. That's where our stuff fits in. EOS is beyond that. Their philosophies get a little bit more complex in big picture. We're trying to bring that down to what can a business owner do today for it. So, but purpose to me is basically, the mission is we're going to take action to affect, and that effect is our purpose. And it's usually affecting something into a belief that we have. Vision we define as what does the organization look like when we're delivering on that promise. So what are the components? What does it need to look like for that? So how do we connect those two? So the first thing we're going to do is look at the requirements for that purpose. So this is our vision. This is how we look at taking a more tactical approach to looking at the purpose and then breaking it down into its requirements. When we work with companies, we don't use the word goals. Goals are arbitrary often, they're emotional. We look at requirements. If you want your company to look like this, what needs to be in place? And that's more calculated and logical approach to it. And then we take those requirements around output of work and put it into a structure. And that's how we account for all of that work, is how we structure it. And we're going to have, I'll show some examples of that. But so when people talk about should we have a structure or not, or what is the structure, don't overthink it. We're going to talk about it in a second, but it's just basically how are we accounting for all the work and the oversight of that work in the organization. So on the people side, the people are those who choose to bring their capabilities and competencies towards our purpose. They want to be on this journey with us. So we need to get their performance and what they're good at to align. We're hearing that word align a lot with some of the different aligned management partners. So how do we get that their expertise and their capabilities to align with that structure and those requirements, and that's through roles. We have to define roles for them. So there's a connecting point between the structure and the roles. Does anybody have any thoughts on what that might be? So it's close to that, and it's part of the structure, and it's really, we call it our task inventory. So talk about boring, it's when I started this and I started getting into it, and I was reading Elliot Jacques, this old guy from the 60s that was all about science, and I thought to myself, this stuff I love structure, and it made so much sense to me. How do I make management and structure and the idea of tasks interesting and sexy? So I'm still working on that. That's still working. But it's basically how are we defining and how are we accounting for all of that work? And so we complete with every organization. We go through department by department. We're not documenting it. We're just identifying the work. So this comes back to what they were talking about earlier, was you don't have to get too crazy in documenting every process. However, you do need to account for it. So I look at it as it's the kind of the broccoli of management. To be healthy, we all know we need to eat our broccoli. We prefer the pizza or prefer to not eat the broccoli at all. So this is kind of along those lines. It's not the most fun thing to do, although usually when we get in there and start dissecting out the different functions of their business, they start to see there's a level of liberation that starts happening to get it all in front of them, especially the role descriptions. We start doing that. We had a general manager at a local winery we were working with, and her role description was 5 pages long after we got done. And the owner of the company was like, I had no idea that she was responsible for so many different things. She was responsible for the management side of things, but also she was the backup for about everybody, especially in their tasting room, maybe not out in the winery, but she was there from morning to night, and it started to become clear why for it. So the topics of management and leadership, right now the hot area is leadership. I think management, those functions don't get a lot of respect, and I think it's, when we talk about leadership, when we're looking at my philosophies or back to Elliot's, it's really around the idea of defining purpose. Why are we here? Why here? Why now? And then, what is the structure going to look like for that? And then management is more of overseeing the ground level, to look at those requirements into the structure, identify the work and tasks, and then identify the roles, and then look at performance. So performance has 3 aspects to it for people that are going to be high performance. Knowledge, just their intellectual understanding of the subject matters, whether it's in their departments or across the organization. The second one is skill, how we apply that knowledge. And then the third is engagement. We'll talk about that in a second as well. So the people part of it, when it comes to engagement, and this is not my expertise, but I feel it needs some attention in the discussion just so you know that I know about it. There's a lot of wonderful coaches that deal more in that than I do. I partner with a lot of coaches where we're going to have a slide in a second about interpersonal skills versus tactical. But engagement is that team member's attitude. Are they showing up to work happy to be there, interested in learning is my biggest aspect of engagement. Are they comfortable making mistakes? Are the managers okay with overseeing those mistakes and correcting them in a useful manner? So familiar with Gallup poll? So Gallup poll did a survey of 2.7 million people, our employees across 100,000 teams, and they came up with a list of 12 needs that employees said they want in their workplace. And the number one was, and we loved this, I want to know what's expected of me at work. And that speaks to everything that we do. These managerial leadership practices are all about, bringing that clarity and letting people know what we expect of them at work. Number 2 was, at work I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. I always present this as, can you imagine going to work and just doing the stuff that you like to do? As an entrepreneur, that's challenging. You're doing bookkeeping, you're up late with a lot of those kind of admin types of tasks. You're overseeing marketing efforts and all of those kinds of things. Usually at the substituting for where you should be thinking about more vision and looking strategic and long-term. Instead, you're in the nitty-gritty of it. And the third one, and again, I picked my favorite 3 of the 12. So if you go to look this up, and you should, this is a wonderful, it's just right on the Gallup poll. It's their Q12. There's someone at work who encourages my development. And so from a manager's standpoint who's directly overseeing, I try to explain it in a way of take them on a journey. From the minute you have that first interview with them, we do this with clients, right? With our employees, from the minute they come in on that first interview, you're setting that stage, what it's going to be like to work there, what it's going to be like to manage that person, and they're going to get a sense of how will my engagement or my interaction with my manager be. And then we take them through to the place where they come in at a certain level of expertise. We always accept that they're not going to know everything that we need them. And then how do we take them on a journey of competency and mastery? People love to be good at stuff. I just started tennis about 3 years ago. I enjoy it way more now because I'm more proficient and I can at least serve, maybe most 80% of the time I'm not double faulting. So, but it just feels good to know something and to be good at something. And I think as managers, that's part of our mission, is to take them through on that. So, any thoughts on these 3 aspects? Yeah.
So this is my nerdy space.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think is interesting, I don't remember the source of it, but we have known through industrial psychology and research for decades that career progression, opportunities for people to do what's best every day, these have been needs for us as the world, the working world, has evolved for decades. And I still don't see enough leaders or managers tapping into it.
Yeah. So like I said, I partner with the coaching community, and they are trying to bring that awareness. And I when I first started doing this, I was having conversations with coaches, and I'm like, if people just do these managerial leadership practices, we don't need you. And I've learned very quickly and respect what they do in conjunction with what we do. And really that's leaning into our next, there's 2 sides to managerial leadership. There's the interpersonal side of things. That's the emotional EQ, conflict resolution. One that I think is undervalued is how to assign a task with inspiration, where you can assign a task to somebody. It's along the lines of that buy-in, but I think if you provide context, and here's where I think they relate, tactical provides context to the work, that they can see it in a structure to where if I do this well, where it makes its way up the organization for it. So, but like I said, a lot of this is active listening, and the emotional side of things, we hear and see that a lot with. We'll talk about it in a second, kind of where you're at with your mindsets and different hierarchies in the organization for it. So, but does anybody work with a coach at all? Okay, and are they getting into those kinds of discussions? So it's one thing is working on your state of mind, but then also do they help with the communication side of it as well with others?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it really is, and I've done coaching myself as a coach with
Okay.
organizations too. Like, there's one thing to know the right path. The other part is like looking internally and doing the inner work that you
Yeah.
need to do to get to that point where you can figure out what that path looks like for you.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think is so great about having a coach myself is like, my time's too busy. This person, I have regular time with them on my calendar, and I can just sit and think and reflect and let things percolate, and then all of a sudden I'm like, aha, now I've got
Yeah.
the motivation and the clarity to move forward.
Yeah, so I have a coach. My problem is I understand these things intellectually. I know what I'm supposed to do, but it's in the real time. It's dealing with the right thing to say in response to certain things. So yeah.
I'd also take it a step further that we all get so far into our own mindset that there are times that I truly believe I've been with leaders who believe that they're doing the right thing, but nobody's there in the moment to know that
Yeah.
they're not doing the right thing and be able to lead them to that next level so that starts perpetuating
Yeah.
behaviors within an organization.
So one of the first introductions I got to the coaching community was cool thing of the internet world now. I have clients on the East Coast, and one of them brought me in to help with structure in these practices, Eat Your Broccoli. And he hired a coach to sit in on the Zoom calls with the teams. So she wasn't saying anything real time, but as soon as the meeting got done, everybody got off, they stayed on the call and discussed how he handled that and what things he said and how he could have. So it was right then and in the moment, right after for it. So that was, again, he needed it. So anyway, so the flip side, the other side to interpersonal is tactical. That's my world. And these are things like we've been talking about already. It's structure, work breakdown structure, it's project planning, it's role descriptions, it's data analytics. I haven't mentioned that at all. How we look at data, and then, although both sides I think are very important of this, and I've said, I believe if you feel like you don't have a strength in the interpersonal side of things, start with the tactical, because they frame conversations very well. You make the task the enemy. And I just read a book called Staying Neutral, and it's a wonderful, I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's Russell that used to be the quarterback for the Seattle Seahawks. It was his coach. And so the book was written by him, but he read it. And he got into the idea of success through just staying neutral. And I think as a manager, if you can see a shortfall in performance, you point to the task, and what Jen and Nathan were talking about. These are agreements. We assigned this task, we talked about it, we agreed this is what we need to get done. I love Brene Brown's, paint done. That's very important in this. We may not give them instructions in the details, but at least we had clear clarification about what we expect that to look like when it's done for it. But this frames, the tactical can frame those conversations in a way that you don't have to be an emotional expert, but you can at least address it in a way that is at the very least neutral for it. So you couldn't have a conversation about managerial leadership without including structure. I've been bringing that up a little bit here and there. And especially in the startup and founding community, we talked about EOS and Pinnacle and all these operating systems and how they like dealing with complication and complexity and size. My whole mission is about get it down to the simplest form to where there's value in it. And at the very least, we look at structure creating order. We just want to organize accountability, and order leads to that clarity. In your organizations, who's got org charts? And how big is your? What's that? Okay. So much larger. But as far as the startups go, is no org chart at this point, or is there? Okay. So when it comes to org charts, we take a very different approach to it than I think that a lot of other organizations do. We talk about accountability. Typically, an org chart they think of as who's reporting to who. And it's a hierarchy of authority, typically. We're more about the work. We use the org chart to break down our work. And we do that because as you start growing, you're going to see the complexity happen. You're going to see all of the different aspects of the business coming in. When we were talking to Aaron, there was this idea, how did you go from idea to actually now you're selling your service? And there was a lot of different functions that had to be thought through for that to happen. Typically, we try to simplify it down to there's 3 primary requirements in every business. Delivery of your service or production of your service, creating demand for it, and then internal operations. So we say start with that. And this is a good model, especially if you have a business partner. You can pick one side or the other. Typically, my experience is visionaries like to sell. So they're overseeing creating demand. When you're a startup, you're doing both, typically. The easiest to outsource is internal operations. That's where you can hire your bookkeeper. You're not usually dealing with HR yet. We figure out our own tech these days. They've made it easy enough where you call your son or daughter. I do. Although I had a tech company, and those skills are gone. Now technology it frustrates me. So this is where we start thinking about your future and your growth. Maybe can you bring in leadership and then you can pick one side or the other completely. That's ideal. Right now, we're looking for a partner for that. Creating demand is my weakness. It's not my strong skill set. I love dealing with clients and dissecting their businesses out and teaching their managers, that sort of thing. So, that's an area of our business that I like. Actually, we're going to get into that right now. So Elliot, when he, in his book, The Requisite Organization, had 7 layers in his organizational design. And I said before, I'm all about simplification. Let's get it down to just the bare minimum of what we would need to, launch a business with. And so there's 3 fundamental layers. The first is your frontline work. And this is where we're just executing work. Most founders understand that. I have to get something completed. I'm writing code. I'm working with the coder perhaps. Or you're just working on developing your business as you would deliver it. You might be making sales calls, frontline work for it. So I'm working right now with a kitchen cabinet design company out in Maine. And so he grew up, his dad was a cabinet designer and builder and installer, so he knows that business very well. But he also sees it as something bigger than it is today when he approached me. He had a vision for it. So he's being the visionary in the CEO role, really answering the question, why are we doing this? What are our services going to be? This is where Traction, they also have, what was their companion book about the visionary integrate? Rocket Fuel. So they have the Rocket Fuel that really talks about the visionary and where the mindset should be. It's really focusing on the market. It's usually focused external to the organization and being the ambassador for it. So the middle part is the management layer, and that's kind of our how. And that's typically where managers come in. And most business owners that I interact with, they're very good at understanding the frontline work. They're very good at vision. They have a vision. They want to see it bigger than it is today someday. But they really don't understand the management piece. I've been going to different events talking to founders, and I ask them about, well, what do you think about management? What do you think about your developing a management team? And they're like, what? So there was a few that were, it's something to think about. And I think if you came from the corporate world into a founder, those are the people that typically get that part of it. So the managers, some of the things that we have them think about, or the aspects of being a manager. First is, I love the term, it was one of my gurus, SME, the subject matter expert. So that's the first thing we need from them, is to really know, if I have an accounting department and I hire a manager for it, they better know how to do journal entries and all of that sort of stuff, accruals, all that fun stuff. So that once they have that understanding and that knowledge in their departments, then we ask them to develop processes. In my world, the people who develop processes are managers. If you don't know if someone is a manager or not, I ask, do you get to dictate process? Then if they say yes, you're a manager for it. So that's, when we talk about the need for granularity in the example of, what was it, driving to the Starbucks? I'd be all over, I'm step by step. But then we have a discussion about it and say, somebody else want to try to do it a different way? We'll come back and we'll have a conversation. And then as a team, we have that institutionalized knowledge that as a group we can have within our department for it. Once we have those processes, then we need to educate and coach our teams on it. So that's the oversight piece to it. And then the final one is we analyze performance. We analyze performance from those people that are executing it and how it aggregates within our departments. So we have those. Anybody understand leading and lagging indicators kind of stuff? So that's the extent to where, when I'm working with clients, we're trying to look at the structure to look at what aspects are we trying to measure for it. So there is one more role that's part of the management team, and that's, we use the term general manager, COO, integrator, if you're talking Traction, I've heard just referred to as your number two. I don't like that term particularly, mostly because I think that it undermines the value. Because especially if you read Rocket Fuel, they really explain that a lot of these successful organizations became successful because of the general manager or the COO. You have to have that person executing on the vision to materialize it. So this is kind of an interesting outcome from Elliott's work, where he was tasked with explaining the pay differential between a CEO and a frontline worker. So as part of trying to create a scientific explanation for it. So basically he came up with the ability to manage complexity. And so at the front line, you typically have people who are repeating and doing work in serial. It's a lot of the same work they're doing over and over again. Their variables are typically fairly limited. And so it's very specialized work. Not that it isn't of value, but it's typically, from a cognitive level, typically a little bit more straightforward. When people think about value, it's like your quarterback isn't like the coach. The coach knows more than everything else, but you need those specialized people, and they're important. So in this conversation, don't want to undervalue that. The managers then are working with the aggregate of the task execution in their departments. So they have to know how that all rolls up and connects with systems. In the accounting department, they're using their QuickBooks or Peachtree or whatever to take the different aspects of accounts receivable, accounts payable, and how does it all roll up into the financials that are at the end of the month. And then the visionary and general manager have to look at all of that aggregation. And the general manager has to see it internally across and connecting systems. So you may have a practice management system that helps you deliver service that needs to connect to our financials. That's typically happening in those decisions and those implementations by the general manager and a team for that. The visionary is thinking more in markets outside of the organization. What's happening in our industry that was mentioned a little bit earlier, those driving forces that are external. COVID was a big one. It really benefited us that as far as the Zoom technology and being remote, it opened up a lot of markets for us in that. Another item that came out of his research was something called time span. And it's, again, related to cognitive abilities and able to think into the future. And I think from you can see, frontline work is repeating again within a minute maybe if you're thinking assembly line kind of stuff, all the way up to where you have a visionary who's thinking in terms of 5 years, having to think through what's going to happen to the company and iterate out into the next year, 3 years, 5 years for it. And then the final aspect of it is decision making. I like it as impact of financial. So usually at the front line, their decisions are $100. You can decide on something to do differently with a client and how you decide that happens. Managers, that starts to accumulate. Typically, their decisions that are most impactful are hiring. What people are we going to have? In a service-based industry, that's your biggest expense. Your general manager's biggest decision is going to be what managers we hire and what systems across. We do a lot of work with, nowadays, it seems, work management systems that are the HubSpots and all of those that track what people do. So when people show up, they know what they're supposed to be working on that day for it. So to piece it together from a structure standpoint, to make it simple, we're basically going to break out at a top level delivery, demand, internal operations. Of course, those are going to have departments in it. We have a small company, and I can't remember how many departments we have because they're holders of work, not people. And then I assign people to that as we go. And then each area, as you grow, you can develop leadership in those different areas for it. And then your management team in the middle, and then the frontline teams for it. So not to overthink it. That's what our kind of goal is in this, that satisfy those different buckets and then you'll be all right. So the 6 practices, we already talked about the task inventory. I'll repeat in that, to me, it shows as a manager of managers that I know they have subject matter expertise. I can look to their task inventory across all their functions within their department, and I can tell they know what they're talking about. The other aspect of it is it becomes the basis for the other 5 practices. The second one being role descriptions. So once we have this task inventory, a list of tasks organized into functions, into those departments, I just simply assign people to them. And now I have role descriptions. So once the task inventory is done, the rest of these go pretty quickly and are pretty easy. The third practice is developing your knowledge base or documentation library. Again, the task into the structure kind of leads you down that road or becomes the framework for that. And then it depends on you as an organization of how granular you want to get in that. We break down tasks in the knowledge base into steps, and then we break steps down into instructions. So we have a methodology that we have all our managers follow, so we have that standardization across all of our departments. The fourth is performance monitoring. We look to the tasks in the structure to look at those leading and lagging and how things are going to aggregate for it. So if you have that structure laid out, what you should be reporting on starts to become easier for it. The fourth is creating training plans. So not only do we leverage off the task inventory, we leverage off, because that's our assignment into our roles. We look to the tasks assigned to the individuals. We rate them. We try to keep it simple. Are you unproven on it? Are you competent? If you prove to us that you can at least do it independently, we call it a solo. Can they do it without us? And then the third tier of that is simply, are they an expert? We have quantities by task to say, you are an expert in this. So we're trying to put a little gameplay in that for it. Then we can average each person in a function to see where the function. So now we're evaluating the managers, because we can average out their departments from all of their team members for it within the training plans. We also use the knowledge base as the basis for creating our training materials. And then the final is continuous improvement. So this is looking again to that structure and to the data to look at constraint analysis. Does anybody know the theory of constraints or been into that at all? So there's a book out called The Goal, and it's basically a method for continuous improvement, similar to Kaizen. Anybody heard Kaizen? So that's more black belt, that's more formal. So everything you've seen here, we've created a small business version of it. So it's easy to implement and easy to understand. So we would look to each function that we've identified that has all your tasks organized into your department and say, strength or weakness? Is it something that we feel good about? We can have some metrics that we look at for that. Or do we not know, which is probably even worse, that we're not sure if it's a strength or weakness at this point. So annually we do that audit or that exercise of sitting down with the managers and going through their functions and seeing where they're hitting on it. At least annually. You should do it more frequently, but we do it part of annual strategic planning for it. Trying to do all of this into a single source of truth. And we did actually end up, they told me not to make this a sales, so I'm not, but we were so passionate about this, and there wasn't anything. We looked at traction tools, and we looked at Pinnacle, and we looked at 90.io and some of these other ones, and they just have a different approach, and we thought it was too complicated, and we really wanted to make this simplified. So we created an app that basically is a single source of truth for these 6 practices. And these 6 practices, I think, are what we picked out as general in this. They're consistent through all these different operating systems. And so it's no big secret. I think Nathan was saying it about that. They're just relabeling this stuff. But we're doing it in a way we hope our mission is really that our sweet spot is post-startup. So you've completed that proof of concept phase, and you're now ready to build that organization and those teams. So along those lines, how do you as a founder start thinking of yourself as a manager? And so typically you're going to be a player coach. You're going to be doing the work. You're going to be developing the processes typically for yourself. And then you're going to have somebody you might hire to help offload some of the work. So you're going to manage them. But we say it's never too early to start these practices, even as a solopreneur. That's what I like about this approach of just dissecting out and adopting practices versus a whole operating system. And you can start doing this if you're a solopreneur. You're not adopting anything, too complex or too crazy for it. Get it on paper. I say more of systemize it, right? Get it to where you can have it work for you. The next thing, you'll grow and evolve to where you might just be managing people and being a visionary. That you are no longer doing frontline work. The sales side of things, that creating demand, which includes marketing and prospecting and sales, we have those as 3 different departments. I think awareness, engagement, and conversion are the new modern fancy terms for that. I'm a little old school. So usually that business owner's involved in doing sales work for a pretty long time. The best salesperson is typically the owner for it. And then eventually, you could grow to the level to where you're playing that manager of managers roles, how you're developing the people that are going to be working at the front line. Simon Sinek, any Simon Sinek fans at all? So he talks about that to where there's a point to where he mentions that CEOs aren't talking to the customers. It's somebody whose boss is the boss of the person talking to the customers for that. Let's see. So, to wrap up, I believe that every person, and this is about the people in our organization, deserves the opportunity to do fulfilling work in an organization that brings clarity. The clarity that can help build their trust and build their confidence and develop that trust. And trust for, I was thinking the other day, what's the difference between confidence and trust? How do you discern the two of them? And I came up with confidence is trust in yourself, and trust is confidence in others. So that's mine. I'm going to coin that, I think. But when you have those trusted teams, then everybody can do the work they love to do. We talked about the lifestyle business and so forth. I think most business owners don't want to just grow it to just make a buck. I think most that I talk to really have passion about a noble cause. And I think they do worry about the people in their organizations, especially in small business, especially in Minnesota. I really do feel that that's true, that there's this level of heightened compassion for the people that work within our organization. So connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like to learn more about what we're doing. We do have our app, and we're offering an extended trial if anybody wants to try it out. More as a demo. I like getting feedback. It's something from, especially we have our sweet spot, like I said, that 200K to $1 million. But we feel like, if we brought it in, early enough, even if you're just a solopreneur or a founder, even in the corporate world, they're doing a lot of these things. We've seen some success in departmental areas with this stuff. We think it can scale, but our focus again is really trying to support management teams in these small and growing businesses for it. it. So reach out if you're interested. Thanks for sticking around again. Got to rush off. There is another, like a happy hour, I think that's coming up here that I know people are going to. So thank you. Yep.
Would you say most of the businesses that that pull you in, have they already had people kind of acting as managers, or are they just looking to start?
You know, there's always kind of acting. You know, what does that mean? You hire somebody, you're going to give them tasks, but it's done very impersonally or very non-structured. So I think it's happening that way, but it's not happening very intentional.
Right.
I go back and forth with the statement about just hire smart people, and you don't have to worry about what. I just don't see that. I think people want instruction. The mind doesn't like ambiguity.
Right.
And so when you come in, I think of some of my worst experiences with managers around the idea that, tell me how you want this done. I don't know, I work with developing accounting departments, and there is so much a lack of oversight. And those mistakes are costly. So, yeah. So it's kind of,
Yeah, because just looking at that side, it's
Already
like,
started walking.
I think there's earlier questions that other topics, like identifying when you, like the operating system.
yeah,
I mean, there's like, you want to start putting the framework in as soon as you get
Yeah.
people. You want to start looking at this.
right. I mean, I started
As you start, maybe you're going to.
with continuous improvement. We have rocks, right? So, I mean, so we're stealing from some of those things, and we're trying to make it so it's not so complicated.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, EOS is like
Being at this point, I know I'm not, I don't have to start over with all that stuff.
Yeah, it
a
is.
lot of the business.
Because it's entrepreneurial. Well, our work is more at management
Yeah.
level.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks, like I said, for sticking around. It's
Yeah, I resonated with a lot of what you're talking about.
yeah,
And in addition, specifically with like the tasks in end software. One thing I've found is that there's always more tasks than is actually listed. So like engineers will start on a task and be like, oh, actually I've discovered that there's like 5 more tasks.
yeah.
On top
Are
of
you a
that.
a coder, developer?
Yep, so I came out of software as just a coder. And
Okay.
I've been slowly working my way up, and now I'm doing consulting, helping startups out.
Okay.
And that's like one really successful thing I've found is instead of worrying too much about the specific tasks, we'll focus on where's the uncertainty and exploring that uncertainty. So like the task will be, we're going to implement authentication so users can log in, but we're only going to do the very minimum possible.
Yeah.
And then we'll move on to the next task,
Yeah.
which is, a landing page, but we'll do the minimum and we'll get through that like.
So it's interesting you bring that up. We have our app. It's called Trellis Tools, and I had never been involved in a software development company. I had these, practices that I had been doing with spreadsheets, and I knew Access, so I started relating the task to role. I knew enough about relational database that I realized this stuff all fits together. We can leverage off of this if we create the task inventory for all these other things. And so I had pitched it to a developer who was a husband of a company we work with. And he was like, I work full time as a developer. I want a pet project. I want something to do on the side. So he dove in and started developing it as a SaaS app now. And so I've been learning, he's been trying to I want it all right now. I want the big app. I want it to do all of these things in a way that and he's just like, minimally viable product.
Yeah.
We need to just get the base, functionality out here and then build
So,
from that.
Like so many software projects I've seen go way out of budget because folks were trying to build each vertical piece entirely
Yeah.
before they moved on to the next. 100%.
Yeah, I learned that lesson. He was very good about like, hold on. And then we would put it out there and get feedback,
Yeah.
that validated learning aspect of it. That we went a little beyond that, I think, because the value in it is all of this integration. So we had to have those pieces in there to show the integration part. But then now it's been about 4 years now, and it's very functional. It's been very effective. I think we're getting good response and feedback. So
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out.
yeah,
I talk to companies going all different sizes, so if I notice that someone's like at that stage.
yeah, for sure. That's like I said, that's our bread and butter is they're ready to build a company
Yeah,
around
exactly.
what they've been able to produce.
But you've never done that before.
Yeah,
So, like-
yeah. Anyway, well, appreciate it. Thank you. Yep, yep. Yeah, pleasure to meet you.